in a quiet Wyoming town, 12-year-old Hannah Parker rescues an injured German Shepherd she names Ranger. Unbeknownst to her, Ranger carries a dark past as a former working dog abused by a private security firm. As Hannah and her family nurture Ranger back to health, his loyalty and bravery shine, but their bond faces challenges when a man claiming ownership of Ranger demands his return. The ensuing court battle reveals Ranger's history of neglect and cruelty, sparking debates about animal rights and ownership. Ultimately, the court rules in favor of the Parkers, granting Ranger the loving home he deserves. Together, Hannah and Ranger find new purpose, with Ranger becoming a therapy dog and inspiring the creation of Ranger's Refuge, a rescue center for animals in need. Ranger's journey is a testament to love, resilience, and the power of second chances. Are you watching from the US, Canada, or somewhere else? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, DG Story. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our next inspiring tale. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more heartfelt stories. The sun hung low over the rugged landscape of Wyoming, casting golden light over the vast fields and rolling hills surrounding the Parker family's modest farm. Hannah Parker, a spirited 12-year-old with an adventurous streak, was busy stacking hay bales in the barn. Despite her slender frame, she worked tirelessly alongside her father, enjoying the crisp autumn air that smelled of pine and earth. "Almost done, kiddo," her father called out, leaning against the barn door. Hannah wiped her brow and smiled. "Just one more stack, Dad," she said, hefting another bale with determination. Her father chuckled, admiring her energy. Life on the farm wasn't easy, but Hannah had always embraced it, particularly when it came to caring for the animals. She had a natural gift for connecting with them, from the spirited horses in the stables to the stray cats that often wandered onto their land. After finishing her chores, Hannah decided to explore the wooded area bordering their property. Armed with her trusty backpack and a small snack, she ventured into the trees, enjoying the serenity of the forest. As she wandered, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot was interrupted by a faint, almost imperceptible whimper. Hannah froze, her ears straining. "Is someone out there?" she called softly. The whimpering continued, weak and pleading, tugging at her heart. She followed the sound deeper into the woods, her pulse quickening with each step. Beneath a cluster of thorny bushes, she spotted a flash of black and tan fur. Dropping to her knees, she peered closer and gasped. It was a dog, a German Shepherd. Judging by its size and markings, the animal was tangled in a cruel snare of barbed wire, its legs scratched and bleeding. Its ribs were painfully visible beneath its matted coat, and its eyes, wide with fear, locked onto hers. "Oh, you poor thing," Hannah whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm here to help." The dog growled weakly, baring its teeth in a half-hearted warning, but its energy was clearly spent. Hannah moved cautiously, speaking in soothing tones as she pulled a pair of wire cutters from her backpack. "This might hurt a little, but I promise it'll be better soon," she said, inching closer. Took several tense minutes, but Hannah finally managed to cut through the wire. As she freed the dog, collapsed onto the ground, too weak to stand. Without hesitation, Hannah took off her jacket, wrapping it around the animal's shivering body. "You're safe now," she murmured, stroking its head gently. "Let's get you home." With surprising strength for her small frame, Hannah lifted the dog into her arms. The trek back to the farm was slow and arduous, but she didn't stop, driven by the animal's shallow breaths and the determination to save it. Hannah stumbled into the yard, her arms aching from the weight of the injured dog. Her father, who had been fixing a fence near the barn, looked up in surprise. "Hannah, what on earth?" he began, rushing over as she carefully set the dog down on the grass. "I found him in the woods, Dad," Hannah panted, her voice laced with urgency. He was caught in barbed wire and barely breathing. We need to help him. Her father knelt beside the dog, his expression softening as he took in the pitiful state of the animal. The dog's eyes fluttered open briefly before closing again, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "All right," he said firmly, his tone decisive. "Let's get him inside. I'll call Dr. Taylor." Hannah nodded and gently helped her father carry the dog into the house. They placed him on an old blanket in the corner of the kitchen, where the family often let their other animals rest. Hannah's mother appeared, her face etched with concern as she took in the scene. "Goodness, Hannah, where did you find this poor creature?" "In the woods," Hannah replied, grabbing a bowl of water and setting it beside the dog. "He's so skinny. Mom, do you think he'll be okay?" Her mother knelt down and examined the dog's injuries with a careful eye. "We'll do everything we can," she assured Hannah. "But he's in rough shape. Let's wait for Dr. Taylor to take a look." Dr. Taylor, the local vet, arrived within the hour. A tall woman with sharp eyes and a gentle demeanor. She quickly set to work examining the dog. Hannah hovered nearby, wringing her hands nervously. "How bad is it?" she asked softly. Dr. Taylor glanced up, her expression serious but kind. "He's malnourished and dehydrated, but the wounds aren't life-threatening. It'll take time, but with proper care, he should pull through." Relief flooded Hannah's face, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. As Dr. Taylor administered fluids and cleaned the dog's wounds, Hannah noticed something unusual. A faint scar ran along the dog's right ear, and its posture, even in its weakened state, seemed oddly alert. "Is that scar normal?" Hannah asked, pointing to the ear. Dr. Taylor frowned slightly, brushing her fingers over the scar. "It could be from an old injury," she said thoughtfully. "But this dog's build and demeanor suggest he may have been trained, possibly for work, police, or military. Maybe." Hannah's curiosity grew, but for now, her focus was on ensuring the dog's recovery. As the vet finished her work, Hannah sat by the dog's side, stroking its head gently. "You're safe now," she whispered again, as if making a promise. "I'll take care of you." The dog's ear twitched slightly, as if acknowledging her words, and Hannah felt a flicker of hope that this was just the beginning of their story. The days following Ranger's rescue were a whirlwind of care and observation. Hannah had officially named him Ranger, after his alert demeanor and watchful nature, reminiscent of the Rangers she read about in her adventure books. Despite his injuries, Ranger seemed to recover quickly under the Parker family's care. However, his behavior remained a puzzle. One evening, as Hannah played fetch with Ranger in the yard, the sharp sound of a truck backfiring on the nearby road echoed across the fields. Ranger froze, his ears flattening as his entire body stiffened. He let out a low growl, not of aggression but fear. "It's okay, boy," Hannah said gently, kneeling beside him. She stroked his head, but his amber eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, his body tense as if anticipating danger. Similar incidents began to occur. Ranger reacted strongly to loud noises, certain objects, and even specific people who visited the farm. When a delivery driver arrived in a truck with a similar color and size to the one Hannah's father owned, Ranger barked incessantly, positioning himself between the truck and the family. "He's protective," her father noted one evening over dinner, "but it's almost like he's been trained to respond to threats." Hannah couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Taylor's observation of Ranger's scar and his potential past. One afternoon, after school, she decided to do some research, sitting in the living room with her laptop. She typed in phrases like "dog with scar on ear" and "trained German Shepherd behavior." Many results pointed to dogs used in police work or the military. Videos showed canines performing advanced tasks, guarding, attacking on command, or reacting to specific cues. Hannah glanced at Ranger, lying peacefully on the floor, his chest rising and falling with each breath. Could her gentle, loyal companion have come from such a background? Hannah voiced her concerns during a follow-up visit from Dr. Taylor, while checking Ranger's healing progress. The vet listened attentively to Hannah's descriptions of his behavior. "He definitely has the build and instincts of a working dog," Dr. Taylor agreed. "But if he was trained for something like that, why was he abandoned? Dogs like Ranger are valuable, highly trained assets, not easily discarded." Dr. Taylor paused, her brow furrowing. "We should check his microchip. If he has one, it might tell us more." She retrieved a scanner from her bag and passed it over Ranger's neck. The device beeped. A chip number appeared on the screen. Hannah leaned closer, her heart pounding. "What does it mean?" she asked. Dr. Taylor's lips pressed into a thin line. "This chip is registered to a private security firm," she said. "It's not local. I'll need to dig deeper to find out more." Ranger's past was no longer a mystery that could be ignored. As Hannah looked into his intelligent, searching eyes, she felt a mixture of excitement and dread. Who had Ranger been before? And what would happen when the truth came to light? Over the next few days, Dr. Taylor worked to uncover more details about the microchip. In the meantime, Ranger continued to exhibit behavior that kept the Parker family on edge. Despite his gentle nature with Hannah, his reactions to certain stimuli grew more pronounced. One sunny afternoon, Hannah decided to take Ranger on a walk through the fields bordering their property. The breeze carried the faint scent of pine and wildflowers, and the peaceful setting seemed to soothe both of them. As they approached a line of trees, Ranger suddenly stopped, his ears perking up. He sniffed the air and growled low in his throat, the fur along his back bristling. "What is it, boy?" Hannah asked, scanning the area. Ranger barked sharply, pulling on his leash. Hannah followed his gaze and spotted a man in the distance, wearing a dark jacket and standing near a black truck parked on the dirt road. The man seemed to notice her and quickly turned away, getting into the vehicle and driving off. Hannah tightened her grip on Ranger's leash, her pulse quickening. She hurried back to the house, Ranger staying alert and tense until they were safely inside. "That's the second time this week," her father said when Hannah told him what happened. "Same truck, same guy. Who is he, Dad?" Hannah asked nervously. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out," her father replied grimly. The mystery deepened when Dr. Taylor called the next evening. "I have some information about Ranger's chip," she began, her tone serious. The company it's registered to was a private security firm that trained dogs for specialized tasks, guarding high-value targets, tracking, even crowd control. But the company shut down years ago after reports of mistreatment and illegal activity. It seems Ranger was part of their program. Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. "So they abandoned him?" "Not exactly," Dr. Taylor replied. "Dogs like Ranger wouldn't just be left behind. They were valuable assets. If Ranger escaped, it might explain why someone is looking for him now." "What happens if they come back for him?" Hannah asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Taylor hesitated. "Legally, ownership could be a gray area," she admitted, "but I'll help however I can. For now, keep a close eye on him, and on anyone who might come near." Later that week, the man in the black truck returned, this time driving up the Parker family's driveway. Ranger growled as soon as the vehicle stopped, pacing in front of Hannah protectively. The man stepped out, his eyes cold and calculating. "That's my dog," he said bluntly, pointing at Ranger. "I've been looking for him. Hand him over." Hannah's father stepped between them, his voice firm. "This dog belongs to my daughter now. You need to leave." The man smirked. "We'll see about that," he said before driving off. Hannah hugged Ranger tightly, fear creeping into her chest. It was clear this wasn't over. The atmosphere at the Parker farm grew tense in the days following the confrontation. Ranger, once beginning to relax in his new home, now seemed constantly on edge. He paced the yard at night, growling softly at unseen threats. Hannah found herself waking up in the early hours, hearing his low barks echoing through the quiet. One morning, as Hannah fed the horses, she noticed Ranger staring intently at the woods, his body stiff and his ears perked. She followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. "Still worried about that man, huh?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. Ranger leaned into her touch, but his eyes never left the tree line. Later that afternoon, Hannah's father set up extra security around the property. "I don't trust him," he told his wife as he installed motion-activated lights near the barn. He didn't look like the type to give up easily. Hannah overheard their conversation and felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. "Dad, what if he tries to take Ranger again?" Her father's face softened as he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We won't let that happen," he promised. That evening, Hannah received an unexpected visit from Dr. Taylor. The vet's face was tight with concern as she handed Hannah's father a stack of papers. "These are old reports from the security company Ranger was trained under," Dr. Taylor explained. "I pulled some strings to get them. The organization was shut down for abusing the dogs in their care. But some of the people involved never faced charges. If this man was part of that, he might try to take Ranger back by force." "What can we do?" Hannah's mother asked, her voice tense. "For now, document everything," Dr. Taylor said. "If he comes back, call the authorities immediately, and whatever you do, don't let him take Ranger." The following night, an unusual sound woke Hannah. A faint rustling came from outside her window. She sat up, her heart pounding, and looked out to see a shadowy figure moving near the barn. Before she could react, Ranger's bark shattered the stillness. The dog bolted out the door, heading straight for the barn. Hannah scrambled out of bed and rushed after him, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. By the time she reached the barn, her father was already there, holding a rifle. Ranger stood growling at the intruder, none other than the man from the black truck. "You've got no right to be here," Hannah's father barked, his voice echoing through the night. The man raised his hands, backing away slowly. "You're making a mistake," he sneered. "That dog doesn't belong to you. That dog belongs to my family now." Hannah's father shot back. "If I see you here again, I'll call the sheriff." The man glared at them before retreating into the darkness. Ranger stayed by Hannah's side, his body tense but his eyes steady. The confrontation at the barn left the Parker family shaken. Though the man had retreated, his threat lingered like a dark cloud over their once peaceful home. Ranger had become more than just a rescue. He was now the family's protector. His loyalty and instincts grew sharper with each passing day. But so did the mystery surrounding his past. Determined to protect Ranger, Hannah's father contacted Sheriff Daniels, the head of their small-town law enforcement. Daniels was a no-nonsense man with a reputation for fairness. After hearing the story, he agreed to investigate. "Something about this doesn't sit right," Daniels said, scribbling notes. "If this man claims ownership, he'll need to prove it in court. Until then, Ranger stays with you." Hannah felt a wave of relief but couldn't shake the unease that the man might resort to more desperate measures. Meanwhile, Dr. Taylor dug deeper into the security firm's records, uncovering a disturbing pattern. The dogs weren't just trained, Dr. Taylor explained during a meeting at the Parker farm. They were pushed to their limits, starved, shocked, and forced into aggressive behaviors. Many of them didn't survive. Ranger must have escaped, which explains the scars and his reactions to certain triggers. Hannah clenched her fists. How could anyone do that to him? Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. People like that don't see animals as living beings. They see them as tools. News of Ranger's past began to spread through the town, dividing opinions. Some sympathized with the Parker family, praising them for giving Ranger a second chance. Others argued that if the man could prove ownership, the dog should be returned, regardless of his history. At school, Hannah overheard classmates whispering about her. "It's just a dog." One boy scoffed. "Why don't they just give it back and avoid the trouble?" Hannah's face burned with anger, but she held her tongue. She knew Ranger was more than just a dog. He was family. 1 week later, the man in the black truck returned, this time with a lawyer in tow. They handed Hannah's father a formal notice demanding the return of Ranger within 48 hours. Hannah's father refused, standing his ground. "If you want the dog, take it to court," he said. The man's lawyer smirked. "That's exactly what we'll do." The encounter left the Parkers scrambling for legal advice. Dr. Taylor introduced them to Rachel Adams, a compassionate lawyer with a history of defending animal welfare cases. "This is about more than just Ranger," Rachel told the family during their first meeting. "If we win, we'll set a precedent for how animals like him are treated in the future." As the court date loomed, Hannah spent her evenings sitting with Ranger, stroking his fur and whispering promises. "We won't let them take you," she vowed. Ranger seemed to understand, his amber eyes steady and filled with trust. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The day of the court hearing arrived with an air of tension that blanketed the Parker household. Hannah sat quietly at the kitchen table, stroking Ranger's fur as her parents gathered documents and prepared for the long day ahead. Ranger, sensing the unease, stayed close to Hannah, his amber eyes steady and watchful. "You ready, kiddo?" her father asked, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Hannah nodded. "We have to fight for him, Dad. We can't let them take him." Her father smiled, but there was worry in his eyes. "We won't." The small courtroom in town was filled with curious onlookers. The case had captured the community's attention, drawing both supporters of the Parkers and those skeptical of their right to keep Ranger. On one side of the courtroom sat the Parker family, flanked by their lawyer, Rachel Adams. Ranger, tethered on a leash beside Hannah, sat calmly but alert, his eyes darting around the room. On the other side sat Mike Harper, his demeanor smug and confident, with his lawyer by his side. Harper occasionally glanced at Ranger, his expression a mix of greed and entitlement. Judge Wallace, a stern but fair figure, entered the room and called the court to order. Rachel stood to present her opening argument. "Your Honor, this case is not just about ownership. It's about the welfare of an animal who has suffered abuse and deserves a chance at a safe and loving home," Rachel began. Harper's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man named Mr. Crowley, countered. "The facts are clear. Ranger is registered to my client through an official microchip. He is the legal owner of the dog, and we demand its return." The trial quickly became a battle of evidence. Rachel presented Dr. Taylor's veterinary reports, detailing the scars and trauma Ranger had endured. Photos of Ranger's initial condition were displayed for the court, drawing gasps from the audience. "These scars tell a story," Rachel said, holding up a photograph. "A story of neglect and mistreatment. Returning this dog to Mr. Harper would be condemning him to further harm." Dr. Taylor was called to testify, explaining Ranger's injuries and behavior in detail. She described the physical and emotional toll the dog had suffered and how he had begun to heal under the Parkers' care. On cross-examination, Mr. Crowley attempted to undermine her. "Dr. Taylor, can you definitively prove that my client was responsible for these injuries?" "No," Dr. Taylor admitted, "but the evidence strongly suggests a history of abuse consistent with the practices of the organization he was associated with." Harper's face darkened, but he remained silent. To counter the Parkers' claims, Harper's lawyer brought in a former employee of the security firm, who testified that the company had a clean record before its closure. "Ranger was one of the best trained dogs we had," the witness claimed. "If he's acting out now, it's because he's no longer in a controlled environment." The statement angered Hannah, but Rachel stayed calm. "We'll address that," she whispered to the family. The courtroom grew tense as Rachel Adams rose to cross-examine Harper's witness, a former trainer from the disbanded security firm. Her calm but focused demeanor commanded the room. "You mentioned that Ranger was one of the best trained dogs under your care," Rachel began, her tone neutral. "Can you elaborate on what that training entailed?" The witness hesitated. Basic commands, obedience drills, tracking, protection work. He replied carefully. Rachel pressed further. Was the training ever harsh? Were methods like starvation or shock collars used to enforce obedience? The man shifted uncomfortably. Not that I was involved in, he said, avoiding eye contact. Rachel's voice sharpened. Were you aware that multiple whistleblowers reported abuse at the firm, leading to its closure? The witness faltered. I heard rumors, but nothing was ever proven. Rachel stepped closer. Yet dogs like Ranger bear scars, physical and emotional, that tell a different story. Is it possible those scars came from the so-called training at your facility? The man's silence was deafening. Rachel turned to the judge. No further questions. Your Honor. During a recess, Rachel knelt beside Hannah and her parents. Hannah, I think the jury needs to hear from you. No one knows Ranger better than you do. Hannah swallowed hard, glancing at Ranger, who sat by her side. Do you think it'll help? Rachel smiled. I do. Speak from your heart, and they'll understand. When court resumed, Hannah took the stand. Her small frame seemed dwarfed by the chair, but her voice was steady as she began. Ranger isn't just a dog to me, she said, looking directly at the jury. When I found him, he was scared and hurt, but he let me help him. Since then, he's been my best friend. He protects me, and I take care of him. Hannah paused, her voice trembling slightly. I've seen the way he flinches at loud noises or how he growls at certain people. It's like he remembers something bad happened to him. But here, with us, he's happy. He's safe. Her eyes locked on Mike Harper, who was staring at her with a cold, unreadable expression. Please don't make him go back to someone who hurt him, she pleaded. Rachel stood for her closing statement, her voice carrying a mix of resolve and compassion. Ranger's story isn't just about ownership, it's about justice. This dog escaped a life of suffering, found safety with the Parkers, and has begun to heal. Returning him to the very people who may have caused his pain would not only be cruel, but it would also violate the principles of decency and care that we all share. She glanced at the jury. Today, you have the power to decide not just Ranger's fate, but the message we send about how we treat those who cannot speak for themselves. The courtroom fell silent as her words sank in. As Rachel finished her closing statement, the courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Mike Harper's lawyer, Mr. Crowley, rose to deliver his rebuttal. His voice was sharp and precise, cutting through the room like a blade. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, pacing before the jury. While I respect the emotional testimony we've heard today, this case isn't about feelings or assumptions. It's about ownership. The law is clear. My client has documented proof that Ranger, or should I say Titan, is his property. Crowley paused, gesturing toward Ranger. This dog is highly trained, valuable, and crucial to my client's business. Any claim of mistreatment is speculative at best. The Parkers may have given him temporary care, but that doesn't erase the legal rights of his true owner. Hannah clenched her fists under the table, her heart pounding as Crowley continued. Just as Crowley returned to his seat, Rachel stood once more, her face calm but her eyes gleaming with determination. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to present one final piece of evidence, she said. Judge Wallace nodded. Proceed. Rachel turned to Dr. Taylor, who stepped forward holding a folder. This is a report from a former whistleblower who worked at the same security firm as Mr. Harper. It details widespread abuse and unethical training methods, including the use of starvation and physical punishment to force obedience. The audience murmured, and even the judge's brow furrowed as Rachel continued. Included in this report are photos of several dogs that were under Mr. Harper's care, one of which matches the unique scar on Ranger's ear. This scar isn't an accident. It's a marker from an electric prong collar used during training. Rachel approached the jury box, holding up the photos. These aren't just scars. They're evidence of a life filled with pain. Harper shot up from his seat, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, drawing everyone's attention. "That dog is mine, and I have every right to take him back." Judge Wallace banged his gavel. "Mr. Harper, control yourself or you'll be removed from this courtroom." Rachel seized the opportunity. "Your Honor." Mr. Harper's outburst is a clear demonstration of his lack of respect for this court and for Ranger. Harper's lawyer tried to smooth things over, but the damage was done. The jury exchanged glances, their expressions shifting. During a brief recess, Hannah knelt beside Ranger, who had remained calm throughout the trial. She stroked his fur, whispering softly, "It's almost over, boy," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll see the truth. I know they will." Ranger leaned into her touch, his steady gaze seeming to promise that he trusted her, just as she trusted him. As the trial resumed, the jury's decision loomed closer, and the tension in the room became almost unbearable. The jury returned after what felt like an eternity. The room fell silent as Judge Wallace called for the court to reconvene. Hannah gripped her father's hand tightly, her heart pounding as the foreman of the jury stood to deliver their verdict. "We, the jury, find in favor of the Parkers," the foreman announced, his voice steady. "Ranger will remain with the Parker family." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, followed by soft applause from supporters in the gallery. Hannah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she hugged Ranger tightly. The loyal dog licked her face, his tail wagging for the first time in days. Mike Harper slammed his fist onto the table, his face a mask of rage. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "That dog is mine." Judge Wallace gave him a piercing glare. "Mr. Harper, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt." Harper grudgingly complied, but the damage was done. His outbursts throughout the trial had painted a picture of someone unfit to care for any living being, let alone a dog like Ranger. As the court adjourned, Harper stormed out, his lawyer trailing behind him. Outside the courthouse, a group of reporters had gathered, eager for statements. Harper refused to speak, brushing past the cameras with a scowl. Rachel Adams turned to the Parker family, a broad smile on her face. "Congratulations. Ranger is officially yours." Hannah threw her arms around Rachel. "Thank you so much. We couldn't have done this without you." "It wasn't just me," Rachel said, glancing at Ranger. "That dog has a way of making people believe in him." Dr. Taylor approached, her expression one of pride and relief. "Ranger's journey has been tough, but this is his second chance. You've given him a new life, and I know he'll never forget that." Hannah knelt beside Ranger, hugging him tightly. "You're safe now," she whispered. "No one will ever hurt you again." Ranger nuzzled her affectionately, as if he understood every word. News of the verdict spread quickly through the small town. Many residents expressed their support for the Parkers and their fight to protect Ranger. Some even volunteered to help with efforts to raise awareness about animal welfare and prevent future abuse. The local newspaper ran a front-page story titled, "Ranger's Redemption: A Family's Fight for Justice." It detailed the trial and highlighted the need for stronger laws to protect animals from neglect and cruelty. For Hannah, the victory was personal but also transformative. She saw firsthand the difference compassion and persistence could make, not just for Ranger but for all animals in need. That evening, back at the farm, the family celebrated quietly. Ranger sat by the fireplace, his eyes calm and content. For the first time in what felt like forever, he seemed at peace. As Hannah stroked his fur, she whispered, "You're not just a dog, Ranger, you're family." And in the warmth of that moment, surrounded by love, Ranger's long and painful journey found its happy ending. The days following the court victory felt like a dream to Hannah and her family. Ranger, once a dog plagued by fear and scars, seemed to radiate a newfound sense of peace. He roamed the farm freely, no longer confined by the weight of his past. Hannah couldn't help but smile every time she saw him playing with the other animals or resting contentedly by the porch. Dr. Taylor visited a week after the trial to check on Ranger's progress. She smiled warmly as she watched him trot confidently around the yard. "He's a different dog," she remarked. "You've done wonders for him." Hannah knelt beside Ranger, running her fingers through his softening coat. "I think he's done more for me than I have for him," she said with a grin. Dr. Taylor chuckled. "That's the magic of animals. They heal us as much as we heal them." Ranger still had moments of hesitation, particularly when he heard loud noises or encountered strangers. But with Hannah's reassurance, those moments grew fewer and far between. The scars on his body remained as reminders of his journey, but they no longer defined him. Hannah's father, inspired by Ranger's transformation, suggested a new idea during a family dinner. "What if Ranger became a therapy dog?" he proposed. Hannah tilted her head, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Well, he's already helped you and our family so much," her father explained. "Imagine what he could do for others who've been through tough times, kids, veterans, anyone who needs a little hope." Hannah's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. Dr. Taylor said he's got the instincts for it. Maybe she can help us figure out how to train him." The family agreed, and over the next few weeks, they worked with Dr. Taylor and a local dog trainer to prepare Ranger for his new role. His natural intelligence and calm demeanor made him a quick learner, and before long, he was visiting local schools and hospitals. During one of his first visits to a children's hospital, Ranger met a young boy named Liam, who had been struggling with severe anxiety. First, Liam hesitated to approach, but Ranger sat quietly beside him, his gentle eyes meeting the boy's. Slowly, Liam reached out, placing a tentative hand on Ranger's head. The change was immediate. A small smile crept across Liam's face, and for the first time in weeks, he spoke. "He's so soft," he whispered. Hannah watched from across the room, tears welling in her eyes. Ranger had found a new purpose, not just as her protector, but as a beacon of hope for others. Ranger's journey from a life of pain to a life of healing had come full circle. But as Hannah would soon learn, their story was far from over. Ranger's visits to schools and hospitals quickly became a staple in the community. Word of his calming presence and inspiring story spread beyond their small town, drawing attention from nearby areas. Children, veterans, and even those recovering from trauma found comfort in the gentle, loyal dog who had once needed saving himself. One day, while Ranger and Hannah visited a rehabilitation center for veterans, something unexpected happened. A tall, weathered man in his late 40s entered the room, his posture stiff and his face lined with years of hardship. He paused when his eyes fell on Ranger. "Is that?" the man began, his voice cracking slightly. Hannah glanced at Ranger, who had perked up at the man's voice. To her surprise, Ranger wagged his tail, a reaction he rarely had to strangers. The man knelt, extending a hand toward Ranger. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. Ranger stepped forward, sniffed the man's hand, and then pressed his head against it. Hannah watched, her curiosity growing. "Did you know Ranger?" she asked. The man nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I was one of his handlers during the early days of his training, before everything went wrong. His name was Titan back then." The man introduced himself as Sergeant David Miller, a former military dog trainer. Over coffee in the center's lounge, David shared his connection to Ranger. "I worked with him when he was just a pup," David explained. "He was the smartest, most loyal dog I'd ever trained. But when the program got handed over to private contractors, things changed. They pushed the dogs too hard, treated them like machines instead of living beings." David's voice wavered. "I tried to fight it, but I didn't have the power to stop them. When the company shut down, I thought I'd never see Titan again." Hannah listened intently, stroking Ranger's fur as David spoke. "He's not Titan anymore," she said gently. "He's Ranger now, and he's family." David smiled through his tears. "You've given him a better life than I ever could. Thank you for taking care of him." Though Ranger's reunion with David was brief, It left a lasting impact. David began volunteering at the rehabilitation center, often joining Ranger during his visits. Watching the two together, Hannah realized that Ranger's journey had brought healing not just to her family, but to those who had known him before. One day, as they walked through the center's garden, David turned to Hannah. "You know, you saved him," he said. Hannah shook her head. "No, we saved each other." Ranger's past, once shrouded in pain, now felt like a bridge connecting people who needed healing. And in every wag of his tail and gentle touch of his paw, he reminded them all that redemption was possible. The Parker family's farm became a haven not just for Ranger, but for the community as well. Inspired by his journey, Hannah and her family started a small initiative to help rescue and rehabilitate other abused or abandoned animals. With the help of Dr. Taylor and local volunteers, they converted an old barn into a rescue center, naming it Ranger's Refuge. The center quickly became a beacon of hope. People from nearby towns brought in strays they had found or animals in need of care. Hannah, with her natural gift for working with animals, took a leading role in their rehabilitation. Ranger became the unofficial ambassador of the refuge, greeting new arrivals with a calm presence that seemed to put them at ease. One memorable day, a young woman brought in a small, trembling terrier mix she had found abandoned by the roadside. The dog cowered in the corner of its kennel, refusing to eat or make eye contact. Hannah sat beside the kennel, Ranger at her side. "Let's give him some time," she said softly, watching as Ranger lay down, his head resting just inches from the kennel bars. Over the next few days, the little dog began to respond, inching closer to Ranger and finally taking food from Hannah's hand. It was moments like these that reminded Hannah of the first time she'd met Ranger and how far they had both come. Ranger's story continued to spread, and soon, it caught the attention of a regional animal welfare organization. They reached out to the Parkers, offering a grant to expand Ranger's Refuge and provide resources for more rescues. At a ceremony to announce the grant, the head of the organization spoke to the gathered crowd. Ranger's story isn't just about one dog's journey. It's about the power of love and second chances. What the Parker family has built here is an example of what we can achieve when we come together to care for those who can't care for themselves. Hannah beamed with pride as she stood beside Ranger, who seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Cameras flashed as the crowd applauded. But all Hannah cared about was the feeling of Ranger's steady presence by her side. That night, back at the farm, the family gathered around a small bonfire, sharing stories and laughter. Ranger lay at Hannah's feet, his eyes half closed as he soaked in the warmth and love surrounding him. Hannah looked up at the stars, thinking about everything they had been through together. "Do you think he knows?" she asked her father. Her father smiled. "Knows what?" "That he changed everything," Hannah said, stroking Ranger's fur. "For me, for us, for everyone." Her father nodded. "I think he does. And I think he's exactly where he's meant to be." As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Hannah leaned down to kiss Ranger's head. "You're not just a dog, Ranger," she whispered. "You're a hero." Ranger's tail wagged gently, as if to say, "I know." Ranger's journey was more than just a tale of survival. It was a testament to the transformative power of love, resilience, and second chances. His story resonated deeply with those who followed it, sparking discussions on broader themes about the relationship between humans and animals, the ethics of ownership, and the role of community in creating change. At its heart, the story of Ranger and the Parker family showcased the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. When Hannah found Ranger, he was a broken soul, both physically and emotionally. His trust in humans had been shattered by abuse and neglect. Yet through Hannah's unwavering patience and care, he found the courage to trust again. This theme touched many who had experienced or witnessed trauma in their own lives. Just as Ranger's scars told a story of survival, so did the emotional scars carried by those who related to his struggles. People saw themselves in Ranger's journey and found hope in his ability to heal and thrive. One local resident, a teacher who had adopted a stray dog after hearing Ranger's story, wrote a heartfelt letter to the Parkers. "Your love for Ranger reminded me that every being deserves a second chance. My dog, Daisy, was scared of her own shadow when I found her, but now she runs through the fields with joy. Thank you for showing us that healing is always possible." The story also raised important questions about the ethical treatment of animals. Ranger's scars were not just physical. They symbolized the cost of seeing animals as tools rather than sentient beings. His transformation under the Parkers' care highlighted the importance of treating animals with compassion and respect. This theme sparked significant debate, particularly around the role of working dogs in industries like security and law enforcement. Some argued that dogs like Ranger are essential to public safety and that rigorous training is necessary. Others countered that such training often crosses ethical boundaries. As seen in Ranger's case, the broader community began to ask difficult questions. How do we balance the practical use of animals with their right to live free from harm? What regulations should exist to prevent abuse in training programs? Ranger's story inspired petitions to strengthen animal welfare laws in the region, including stricter oversight of organizations involved in training working dogs. The Parkers, along with Rachel Adams and Dr. Taylor, became vocal advocates for these changes, using Ranger's story as a rallying cry for reform. Perhaps one of the most significant outcomes of Ranger's journey was the sense of unity it brought to the town. People from all walks of life came together to support the Parkers during the trial, and many stayed involved through volunteer work at Ranger's Refuge. The story reminded everyone that collective action can create lasting change. Ranger's story had not only touched the hearts of those in the community, but also sparked heated debates and discussions across social circles. While many rallied behind the Parkers and their fight to protect Ranger, others raised difficult questions about the broader implications of his case, shining a light on ethical dilemmas that extended far beyond one dog's journey. One of the most divisive aspects of the trial was the question of ownership. Mike Harper and his lawyer argued that Ranger was a valuable asset, a dog trained for specific purposes, and that legally, he should be returned to his rightful owner. However, Rachel Adams and the Parkers fought against this narrative, emphasizing that animals are not objects to be bought, sold, or discarded. Ranger's case highlighted the need to reconsider how the legal system categorizes animals. Should they continue to be treated as property, or should they be recognized as sentient beings with rights to safety and well-being? This debate struck a chord with many animal rights activists, who used Ranger's story to advocate for change. Across social media, hashtags like #JusticeForRanger and #AnimalsAreFamily began trending, with thousands sharing their own stories of rescue and redemption. A prominent voice in the discussion was a regional animal welfare organization, which issued a statement. Ranger's case is a reminder that animals are not disposable. They feel pain, fear, and love, just like we do. It's time for our laws to reflect that reality. Another significant discussion centered on the ethics of training animals for military, police, or security purposes. While many acknowledged the value of working dogs in these fields, Ranger's scars told a darker story of abuse and exploitation. Some questioned the practices of private training firms like the one that had handled Ranger, arguing that profit-driven operations often prioritize efficiency over the welfare of the animals. Others pointed out the lack of oversight and accountability in such industries, calling for stricter regulations. During a community town hall organized by the Parkers, one veteran who had worked alongside military dogs shared his perspective. These animals save lives, no question about it, but they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. What happened to Ranger isn't just wrong, it's a betrayal of their loyalty. Ranger's story didn't just expose the flaws in existing systems, it inspired actionable change. The town saw an increase in support for local shelters and rescue organizations, with more people adopting animals rather than purchasing them. At Ranger's Refuge, visitors often asked to meet the dog who had become a symbol of hope and resilience. Hannah took pride in sharing his story, but she always emphasized one thing: Ranger isn't just special because of what he's been through. He's special because he reminds us that every life matters, no matter how small or broken it seems. Ranger's story continued to inspire and challenge people far beyond the boundaries of the Parker family's small town, as his journey reached wider audiences through news articles, social media, and community events. It brought to light the profound ethical and emotional connections between humans and animals. At its core, Ranger's story was about redemption, not just for him, but for everyone involved. Hannah and her family were transformed by their relationship with Ranger, finding purpose and joy in his recovery. Ranger, once broken and distrustful, had rediscovered his place in the world through their love and care. This theme resonated deeply with people who had faced their own struggles. Emails and letters flooded the Parker household, with individuals sharing how Ranger's journey inspired them to face their fears or give second chances to those in need. One letter, from a retired police officer who had adopted a rescue dog, read, "Ranger reminded me of my partner, Max. He was my partner on the force for years, but when he got injured, they wanted to put him down. I couldn't let that happen. Now Max is retired and happy, just like he deserves. Thank you for sharing Ranger's story. It's a reminder that every being deserves a shot at redemption." Ranger's trial highlighted significant gaps in animal welfare laws, sparking calls for reform at the state level. Advocates argued that the legal system must evolve to protect animals from exploitation and abuse, especially in industries that rely on their skills. Several key proposals emerged from the debates, including stricter regulations for training facilities, mandatory oversight and inspections to ensure humane treatment of animals, legal recognition of animal rights, revising the classification of animals from property to sentient beings under the law, harsher penalties for abusers, increasing consequences for those found guilty of neglect or cruelty toward animals. The Parkers, along with Rachel Adams and Dr. Taylor, became prominent voices in this movement, using their platform to push for legislative change. Hannah, despite her young age, spoke at local events, sharing her firsthand experience with Ranger. Her heartfelt speeches moved audiences and inspired action. As time went on, Ranger became a symbol of resilience and hope, his story woven into the fabric of the community. Ranger's refuge grew into a thriving rescue center, helping countless animals find second chances and loving homes. Hannah often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "When I found Ranger, I thought I was saving him," she said during a community fundraiser. "But he saved us just as much. He showed us the power of love, forgiveness, and never giving up." The event ended with applause as Ranger, now fully at ease in his new role as a therapy and ambassador dog, wagged his tail and nuzzled against Hannah's leg. In every act of kindness, in every life saved, Ranger's legacy lived on, a reminder that no matter how dark the past, the future could always be brighter.